From pulling up shorts to warm-up dance rituals, today we're going to take a closer look at the in-ring habits of UFC fighters that have left us scratching our heads, or even laughing out loud. First up, let's talk about Tia Tuivasa, and his habit of constantly pulling up his shorts during his fights. In fact, it became such a noticeable habit that Jon Jones even called him out on it. Jones said he spent half the fight with his left hand down. I've never seen anything like that. It's almost hard to watch, and I totally agree. It can definitely be a bit distracting when you're in there with someone who has a habit like that. You start to focus on it, and it can throw you off your game a little bit. But at the end of the day, it's up to the fighter to decide what works best for them. Because some fighters have actually identified certain habits or weaknesses in their opponents and used them to their advantage in the ring.
We're working off of that jab early. Oh! Knocked down for Oliveira now! Now a knee to the body for Charles and a right hand! Chandler retreats! Now Chandler is down! Charles Oliveira!
For example, Khabib Nurmagomedov is known for targeting his opponent's legs, especially if he knows they've had previous injuries in a particular area. He does this because it makes him able to wear down his opponent and gain an advantage by focusing on their weak spot. I guess it's all about strategy and finding any little advantage you can in the octagon. And I'm sure if you were a fighter and you knew your opponent had a habit or a weakness, you'd want to exploit that as much as possible. Of course, not all habits or quirks are necessarily bad. Some fighters just have unusual habits that make them stand out from the crowd. For instance, former fighter Roy Nelson was known for his unique warm-up routine that involved him slapping himself on the belly and dancing around a little bit. Talk about weird. Roy was always a character, both inside and outside of the ring. But personally, I think it's great when fighters have a little bit of personality and are willing to show it off. Now, I think we can all agree that one of the most interesting things about UFC fighters is the way they approach their fights.
Kind of a stumble from this one, but it doesn't matter. Hit the ground all the same.
So overhand left to a trip for Volkanovski on that one. And he's really picking up the pace now.
Every fighter has their own unique style, and that obviously has to translate into some interesting and sometimes bizarre in-ring habits. For example, Diego Sanchez is known for standing still and staring at his opponent. It's an intense, almost creepy habit that has unnerved some of his opponents in the past. Yeah, Diego is definitely a character, and he's always been a bit of an oddball, but I think that's part of what makes him such a good fighter. He's unpredictable, and he's not afraid to be himself. Another fighter with an unusual in-ring habit is Tony Ferguson, the fighter who's known for doing things like hitting himself in the face to get pumped up. That's one way to get riled up for a fight, and it's definitely one of the more intense ones I've seen. But hey, it works for him. Who am I to judge? You've got to do what you got to do to get yourself in the right mindset for a fight. Of course, not all in-ring habits are unique to individual fighters. Some habits are actually quite common among many UFC fighters, but not all in-ring habits are harmless. Some habits can actually be detrimental to a fighter's performance. For instance, some fighters have a tendency to drop their hands or lower their guard during a fight. It might be a bad habit that they've developed over time, but it can leave them vulnerable to their opponent's attacks. Yeah, dropping your hands is definitely a bad habit to have. It's something that you need to be aware of and work on if you want to be successful in the UFC. But like I mentioned before, some fighters have actually identified certain habits or weaknesses in their opponents and used them to their advantage in the ring.
And that is it! France has the UFC champion, Cyril Gane, the interim UFC heavyweight champion. Total domination on the road tonight.
Like Jon Jones, who managed to take advantage of Daniel Cormier's tendency to duck his head during a fight. Now, by exploiting that weakness, Jones was able to gain the upper hand and ultimately won the fight.
Declaring the winner by knockout, and now, and again, the new undisputed UFC.
I guess being aware of your opponent's weaknesses and using them to your advantage is what makes Jon Jones one of the greatest fighters in the UFC.
And Mr. decision, and still the undisputed UFC light heavyweight champion of the world.
I mean, Bones even went up a weight class recently and still won. That's what I call a warrior. And it's not just weaknesses that fighters look for in their opponents. Some fighters have also identified bad habits that their opponents have in the ring and use them to their advantage. Like Kevin Gastelum's habit of swinging his arms in the air after throwing a sick combo, or while he's dodging attacks. Sure, it works most of the time, but this habit gives his opponents the opportunity to land strikes and come out on top. It's all about finding those little things that can give you an edge in the fight. Heck, Nate Diaz does sort of the same thing during his fights to act all macho. I mean, yeah, he shows off, takes hits, bleeds all over the octagon, and ends up winning most of the time, but it's habits like this that also lead to a fighter's downfall. Now don't get me wrong, Nate Diaz is a tough cookie, but this tiny little quirk of his did contribute to his loss against McGregor at UFC 202. Speaking of McGregor, it wouldn't be fair if I forgot to mention his habit of swinging his arms around. I mean, the billionaire strut is justified, but what's not justified is this one fighter who likes to hop on one leg before a fight. I like to call this fighter Tony Ferguson the Flamingo, you know, because flamingos do that one leg thing. Now, Tony's a great fighter and all, but what's up with that hopping? I mean, I know hopping is a great way to warm up, but save it for the dance floor, Tony. And then we have Michelle Waterson, who does maybe the strangest stretching I've ever seen. Now, Michelle's a tough fighter, but have you seen her stretch? I mean, she looks like she's auditioning for a part in The Matrix. Don't get me wrong, I get that you want to be flexible, but there's no need to twist yourself into a pretzel before a fight, Michelle. That's not even the strangest thing any fighter has ever done, though, because there are fighters like Dominic Cruz who like talking to themselves in the corner of the octagon. I like to call this particular fighter the self-motivator. Now, I've heard of giving yourself a pep talk, but Dom takes it to a whole new level. He's like his own hype man, telling himself to breathe and stay focused. It's kind of funny when you think about it. I mean, come on, Dom, you don't need to be your own coach. Leave that to the professionals. But wait, there's more. There's Sean O'Malley, who likes to bust a move in the ring before a fight. My man is literally like a dancing queen. Now, Sean's got some moves, I'll give him that, but save it for the club, mate. I mean, I get that you want to psych out your opponents, but I'm pretty sure dancing won't help you win a fight. From pre-fight routines to bad habits and weaknesses, it's clear that every fighter is unique and has their own approach to the sport. So there you have it. Those were some of the weirdest tics and habits that fighters have in the octagon.